Velated, thank you for your love and support. I appreciate it all. The Middle East is sitting on a massive diplomatic and military powder keg, and the latest statements coming out of Tehran shows just how close this regional conflict is to completely get out of control. When you look at the recent press conferences and television addresses by major Iranian military leaders, specifically Major General Mohsen Razi, who serves as a top security official and the secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council, you begin to see a deliberate strategic playbook unfolding. This is not just random political posturing or standard media rhetoric. This is a clear, calculated military doctrine designed to counter American economic pressure, redraw the rules of engagement in the Persian Gulf, and send a terrifying message to every nation sitting on the fence in the Middle East. To truly understand what is happening right now, you have to look at the massive shift in how Iran views economic sanctions. For decades, Western nations, led by the United States, have used economic blockades, trade bans, and banking restrictions as their primary weapon to force Tehran into compliance. The idea was simple: choke the economy, cripple the ability to trade, and force the government to surrender at the negotiating table. But General Razi made it explicitly clear that Tehran will no longer yield to American economic pressure or accept a state of perpetual blockade. Iranian leadership is taking the stance that economic warfare is no different than military warfare, and they are now treating financial sanctions with the exact same military response they will use against dropping physical bombs.
Iran's top security official has reiterated that Tehran does not seek war, but will not surrender to U.S. economic threats and the blockade imposed on the country. In a televised interview, the Secretary of Iran's Supreme National Security Council said the U.S. should change its behavior and honor its commitments. Major General Mohsen Rezai added that Iran does not seek to expand war in the region, but will hit the interests of those countries that help the U.S. in its economic war on Iran. He slammed U.S. President Donald Trump's economic war threats, warning Washington's regional allies against becoming part of that war. Rezai said any country participating in the imposition of economic restrictions against Iran is considered an enemy. On the issue of the Strait of Hormuz, Rezai said despite the U.S. claims the strait is closed and will remain closed until Washington fulfills its commitments, the senior commander noted that if regional countries help the U.S. in its economic war on Iran, not a single drop of oil will leave the Persian Gulf and the Strait of Hormuz. He threatened that Iran will also target alternative routes used to export oil from the Persian Gulf.
Iran's dependent, limited, and inadequate defense industry before the Islamic Revolution has, over the past 47 years, undergone a process of development and accelerated growth. In fact, Iran's 90% dependence on foreign arms and equipment before the Islamic Revolution has been transformed into 90% self-sufficiency in arms and equipment after the revolution. There were various factors behind the rapid advancement of Iran's defense technology and industry. The most important were the guidance of Imam Khomeini and Imam Khamenei, as well as the cultivation of self-confidence which became institutionalized in the Islamic Republic of Iran's defense sector. The sanctions imposed over the past 47 years by the United States and some Western countries against Iran's armed forces and defense industry were also one of the factors that turned sanctions and restrictions into an opportunity for self-reliance and the domestic development of weapons and equipment. The diversity of weapons and equipment across various fields of combat has also been one of the achievements of our defense industry. What is new today, and can be cited as a recent achievement, is the skills, experience, and field-based lessons that the armed forces and defense industry have acquired during the two most recent imposed wars. Today, following the 12-day and 40-day wars, we are seeing the speed and scope of growth in the defense industry at a greater level than before. Despite some damage and losses inflicted on parts of Iran's defense industry as a result of attacks by the U.S. and Israeli enemy, the defense industry is now operating across Iran with broad national participation. As a result, over the past year, Iran has produced twice as many military products, equipment, weapons, and ammunition as it did in the period preceding the 12-day war.
This directly connects to the situation in the Strait of Hormuz, which is arguably the most dangerous economic choke point anywhere on the planet. Millions of barrels of crude oil pass through this narrow maritime corridor every single day, powering factories, fueling transportation, and keeping the global economy afloat. When General Razi addresses the status of the strait, he is not just speaking to Washington, he is speaking to global markets. Iran's position is that the Strait of Hormuz remains effectively closed and strictly controlled, and it will stay that way until Washington changes its behavior, removes the economic blockades, and honors its international commitments. Now, this is where the strategy takes a very aggressive turn toward global neighbors. Tehran is no longer just targeting the United States directly. They are actively threatening every single country in the Persian Gulf and the wider region that assists Washington in enforcing these economic sanctions. General Razi issued a direct and uncompromising warning. Any country that participates in the imposition of economic restrictions against Iran or allows its territory, ports, or airspace to be used to help the American economic blockade will be officially classified by Iran as an active enemy. The consequences of this classification are severe. Iranian military leadership has threatened that if regional countries help the United States carry out its economic war, Iran will ensure that not a single drop of oil leaves the Persian Gulf or the Strait of Hormuz. Think about the gravity of that statement. They are declaring that if Iran cannot export its oil and participate in global commerce, no nation in the entire region will be allowed to export oil either. To make sure there are no loopholes, General Raisi specifically added that Iran will also target alternative land routes, pipelines, and bypass ports that neighboring states might try to use to get their oil out to the world. They are setting up an all-nothing scenario designed to make the cost of supporting American sanctions far too high for local Gulf nations to bear. To understand why Iran feels powerful enough to make these kinds of global economic threats, you have to dive deep into the history of their military development over the last 4 decades. Before the 1979 Islamic Revolution, Iran's military was heavily dependent on foreign powers, especially the United States. 90% of their weapons, ammunition, spare parts, and military technology had to be imported directly from abroad. When the revolution happened and Western countries cut off all military supply lines, Iran was left completely exposed, facing a devastating 80-year war with Iraq with almost no domestic capability to produce their own weapons. According to General Razi, those 47 years of continuous Western sanctions forced a complete structural transformation inside the country. Instead of destroying their military capability, decades of strict arms embargoes forced Iranian engineers and military planners to build an entirely independent defense industry from scratch. Today, Iranian officials state that they have completely invented that original percentage. They have gone far from 90% dependency on foreign arms to 90% self-sufficiency in domestic weapons production, building everything from ballistic missiles, long-range attack drones to radar systems and armored vehicles inside their own borders. This domestic industrial setup was put to the ultimate test during recent direct military confrontations, including intense 12-day and 40-day war cycles that involve direct airstrikes and missile exchange. America and Israel strikes hit several key Iranian defense facilities, aiming to destroy manufacturing plants, disrupt supply chains, and break the back of Iran's defense output. But as the general highlighted in his press address, the military-industrial complex did not collapse. Instead, it adapted and decentralized its operations across the entire country. By taking the lessons learned directly from real-time combat during those short, high-intensity wars, Iranian defense factories actually accelerated their production schedules. This is why we are calling African leaders to unite and make sure they build what will help us defend ourselves rather than depending on other people for survival. Like P.O. Lumumba said, the reason to which they are always on the neck of Africa is because they know Africa is powerless. We continue to depend on them for defense. But we should also empower ourselves by acquiring the same things that people use to threaten the African, just like Iran has done. And until we do that, we'll continue to be at the mercy of other people. And this is why we are seeing the leaders in Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso fighting to get what they themselves can produce rather than depending on other people. A borrowed garment can never keep you warm. We are the only ones that can set ourselves free. United we stand, divided we fall. And united we keep standing forever and ever. The greatest enemy of the African is mental slavery. So let's decolonize ourselves from mental slavery. Let's keep sharing to educate our brothers and sisters. Together we'll make Africa great for ourselves and the next generations that are going to come. So that's the latest around the world, Middle East, and in Iran.